Everyone, I'm going to do a bird cherry prunus tree today. So this is part of my tree practice series, and it's really good to practice these techniques. So this one is a very pretty spring tree. I've got one in the garden, and it's quite a simple one to do. So what I'm going to use today is a natural sponge with lots and lots of bobbly bits, you can see here, and that's going to pick up the paint to get that lovely blossom that we need. So it's two colours today. I've got several colours on this palette. The two colours you need to be concerned about are the permanent rose and the sepia. So if you haven't got either of those, you want something that is pink. So you could use a little bit of rose madder. You could use a little bit of something like a cadmium red with a bit of Chinese white in. If you haven't got those, you could use alizarin crimson with a bit of Chinese white. So there are options for you. The sepia, if you haven't got that, any sort of dark brown will do. So burnt umber would do. You could make a mix with cobalt blue and burnt sienna, or ultramarine and burnt sienna. So there's some options for you. The paper that I'm using today is just a little bit of Bockingford that I've had lying around, so it's just a cellulose wood pulp paper, and it will work fine for this. So this brush is damp. I've wrung it out really well. I've dabbed it off on some kitchen towel. Use a flat palette, and I've got a little bit of the rose just on the palette, and then I'm going to come on. So I'm dabbing nice and delicately. You'll see that as I dab, I twist mid-air, then dab again. The reason that I'm doing this is because I don't want the same pattern. If I go like that, I'll get exactly the same pattern from the sponge. What I want is a different pattern every time. So it's like a little twist in the air before you dab back down. You need to be very delicate when you're doing this, not too heavy-handed. You also notice that I've squeezed the sponge. The sponge itself is actually quite big, but you can squeeze it just to use one area. Because this is so delicate, we won't need a lot of paint, but sometimes sponging can use a lot of paint. So I'm getting a really nice, delicate effect. Now, you don't want it to be too blobby. If you come on and it looks blobby or they start to join together, that's because it's too wet. So then you need to go back to the drawing board and just check that you're not getting too much water on that sponge. It needs to be really dried off with a kitchen towel. Also check you're not collecting up too much paint. Flat palette works wonderfully for not collecting too much up. So I've got some really nice delicate foliage there. Then I'm going to use two brushes. I've got a round number 6 and a number 2 rigger. So this is a long thin brush that's great for branches. I'm going to dip my brush into the water, then dip it into the neat sepia. I'm going to start from the bottom where the tree grows from and work my way up. Nice upward stroke, concentrating on getting one side a little bit darker. If I just then take a damp brush, I've dabbed it off a tiny bit. I don't want too much water in here. I can flow that along, and that's going to give me a lighter edge. If you struggle to do that, you can just take in an extra bit of paint after down the edge that you want to be darker. So I'm concentrating on getting a nice trunk shape to start with. You should always check that your tree's got a jaggedy bottom. You don't want it to be too, unless it's in snow. In snow, then it does need a smooth bottom, but otherwise it's always better to do it jaggedy. So then I'm going to use my rigger and start to come off to to do these really fine branches. I'm resting on my little finger. And I want that branch to go all the way up to the end of that foliage, so that nothing is floating. Another one here. Now, you don't have to copy this exactly. It's there as a pictorial reference, this picture. It is useful to see how the branches go, but when you're sponging, sometimes the sponge is a bit more random and you need to work with what you've got. It's no good following exactly this picture if you've got foliage in a different place. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this upside down. Then turn the reference photo upside down. Now I find it easier, I've shown you that way, but I find it easier to work to a point painting downwards. So by turning it upside down, I've got a much nicer flow. It's personal preference. I would say try it both ways and see which one you like. What I'm doing is I'm staggering the junctions for these branches. You don't want them to come off at the same place. It looks much more natural if they come off at a different place. You can have some overlap, that works nicely as well. Turn that round, so we've got a beautiful cherry tree appearing here. So if I take a little bit more, that sepia in, mine's still damp, so I can take a little bit down this edge and make that a little bit darker. If it doesn't flow, then you just need to take a damp, clean brush and just paint a little bit more water in, just not a lot. That's just taking that little bit of extra water in there, just to help it flow a little bit. Now this is the side we've made darker, so we need the shadow to come this way. So that is just a little bit of water pulling that sepia that way. I've got a touch of sap green here, and I can pop that in at the bottom, just so that I've got a base there. So there we go. So that's a bird cherry. If you've enjoyed this and you want to have a go at some other trees, I'll pop the playlist down here for my tree practices, and I shall see you next time.